In this tutorial, we're going to talk about budgets. Now, there's a lot of different levels to budgets in the practice management workspace. There is the staff tracking budget, where you can actually set up a specific budget of billable time or total hours for a staff member, and then you're able to track that based on what they have been assigned or what they've actually tracked. There's also assigning of the budgets, meaning as you're creating events inside the system, you're putting a budget time on it and assigning that to the staff member. There's also budgets as they pertain to projects. Now, in that discussion, there's actually two areas. There's the general project budget. So an example of that would be a 1040, and it's budgeted for 4 hours. Or an assignment level budget, where inside of that project, you have various tasks that need to be completed, like input and prep and review. And you're actually assigning a specific budget to each one of those assignments. Now, when we're talking about project budgets, those two sets do not coexist. You can't have both an overall project budget separate from the individual assignment budgets. The reason being is they kind of overlap. So, for example, the total accumulation of all of your assignment budgets are your project budget. Okay, you'll see how this works out in a minute. I'll walk through that and kind of show you how that works out. But before we go there, we're going to talk about a staff budget and how you set that up. So each staff member can have their own budget, and the easiest way to access that is just to go to Setup at the top of the screen, Staff, and Budget. Now, obviously, this area is controlled by user rights. We're logged in as an admin, so we'll be able to access this no problem. And then you're greeted by this screen. So over on the left, we can see all of the staff members. I've selected myself here. We can see a graph of the year and month, so we can break this down and get very specific if we need to. But we're just going to look at 2012. And then we can see our graphed budget here. And what we're looking at, let me go ahead and expand this out a little bit for everybody, is the breakdown of our billable hours. And we can see that over here in the right corner that we have billable selected. Now we can also view total, okay, and our graph changed a little bit accordingly. But with these options, we can see the available hours that have been budgeted. So we can see that we have 150 hours for the beginning of the year, and then 60 for the rest, and then we get around September, October, it goes up a little bit. So obviously we can see that this is going with the ebb and flow of tax seasons. All right. Now, as we begin to assign work in the system, so what you'll see in a minute is that as I delegate work to this staff member, or better example, to myself, my assigned graph is going to start going up. And we'll see an orange graph, and it'll begin to creep up the list here. So as I start assigning work to myself or others, that is being tracked as budget detail also. Now, when that task shows up and I complete it and I track my time for it, we're also tracking that. We're tracking the actual. So ideally, as time goes on, we're actually going to see 3 or 4 different lines here. We're going to see what's available, so what's been budgeted, what's been assigned, and what's actually been completed, and we'll be able to compare all of those. Now, we're also tracking staff cost. So now the staff cost field is driven off of a setting that's located under the HR tab. So if I come up here to the HR tab, I can see the staff cost rate. So the number that you choose to put in here can be a lot of different things based on what you want to track. Some offices will just put the flat hourly cost of the staff member in here. Some offices will include burden like benefits and things of that sort. Whatever option you choose is fine as long as it's consistent across the office. Okay, so back to our budget here. So as time goes on, obviously, we begin populating our budget items, we'll see these graphs move around. Now, to edit this screen, you're actually going to want to come up to the top right and choose Edit, because right now we're in view mode. So if we go to the Edit screen, we can actually see where we enter in on a month-by-month basis for a specific year all of the budgetary details that we want to track. And we have 3 columns here: total, bill, and cost. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the total hours and the cost are actually connected. So let's just say, for example, I put a cost of $20 in there, and I had a budget, of X amount of hours. Those two would actually change accordingly and update themselves. And bill hours, we can put whatever we'd like in there. So this is a month view for 2014, and obviously we can start to fill in the blanks. If you need a little bit more granular detail than that, however, you can actually come down here and go to advanced mode. Now, the reason you'd want to come in here is you want to set up very specific date or time ranges for your budget details. Maybe January isn't clear enough and you want the first 2 weeks in January and the last 2 weeks in January to have 2 different type of budgets. You can do all that from here. So once this is done, you've now set up your staff budget. And now we have something to track against. So how this will begin to populate is when you start using the practice management workspace. And we'll start off with something simple. For example, let's just come into the to-dos tab, and we're going to give myself a task, an assignment. So I come to the to-dos, go ahead and create a new one, and the form opens up. Now, there's a lot of details in here, and obviously we have other tutorials and guides that will cover more about what to-dos are, but what we're looking at in this case is this field right here, the budget hours. Now, you'll see this available on many different areas throughout the program. It's going to appear on phone calls, appointments, projects, assignments, even document reviews, and so on. This is the budget that we're giving this particular staff member with this particular task. So I'm just going to go ahead and put in, for example, 2 hours. All right, I'm going to save my task. Now, a couple things happen. First of all, obviously, we're tracking our assigned budget. So on our previous screen, we would see now that we have 2 hours of assigned work. Down on the bottom, the staff member is actually being alerted to not only the event and all the details that they need, but they can see their budget right down here. When this task is complete and it gets checked off of our list or completed from the main screen, and we track our time for it, okay, that time is actually going to reflect in the actual for that task. So we've done a couple things here. We've given a budget overall for a staff member. We've assigned work and put an actual specific time frame on that work. They've been alerted to that and completed the task. And then their actual time that they actually tracked and recorded is now also showing up. So as time goes on, we'd be able to see not only what was budgeted, what was assigned, but ultimately what was actually done. And we can compare all these numbers. This is very handy for forecasting. Next year, it'll be important to know what we did this year, and so on and so forth. So that type of system is very common through the program. Again, this is applicable on phone calls and appointments and so on. And I'm not going to go through all the various areas where these budget boxes pop up, but you'll see them scattered throughout the program. Now, those are what we kind of call general budgeted events. Projects are a little bit different than that as far as their usage. Ultimately, the details remain the same. You have assigned amount of work. As it gets completed, you're tracking an actual. The difference being is now you're actually not assigning work to a specific staff member, but you're assigning it to the project as a whole, at least on one level. So when you're setting up your projects, and this is where it's going to segue a little bit, when you're setting up your projects, you actually have an area for billing options. So if I go to my project definitions here, this is where you decide the name of your project, when it's due, how it rolls over, and so on and so forth. One of the options in this menu here are billing options. And from here, down on the bottom, we can actually put in an estimated budget. So again, this allows us to track a budget for the project as a whole. In this example, it's a 1040. So with these details down here, again, what we want to do is make this the big picture. This isn't a per task budget. This is the total project. So just to put an example in here, so we have some numbers, maybe I'll say 4 hours. It's going to cost the office based on the staff cost, $150. And then ultimately I'm going to charge $400 for it. And that's what those fields do. That's what those fields cover, the hours, the staff cost, and the fee. Whether the fee comes from Lacert via the sync, whether it's entered in manually. It can be controlled on a per client level if needed. Remember, these are just global settings, so these are going to apply to every 1040 we create regardless of client. And obviously I know what everybody's thinking, and the reality is not every client's the same, and it's kind of tricky to really set these in stone at this level. However, it can be helpful. So we've done that. We've said we have a 4-hour project here, and we're going to go ahead and say okay. So now, when we create our project for our client, and I'll just do that here real fast, so bear with the screens while I try to get it up on the board here. We can see we now have our 2013 1040, and down the bottom we can actually see those budgetary details. Our estimated 4 hours, our staff cost, and our fee. Now, all of these events right here actually have their own alerts and reminders. So you can track and get alerted to when you exceed your hours, when you exceed your staff cost and your fee. Not to mention the fee is actually also connected to the invoice and billing section of the program. So from this screen, based on the fee amount that I have in there, I can actually invoice this project, relieve any WIP that's associated to it, and bill for our $400 fee. So now I know we're segueing a little bit off budgets here, but the important thing to know is that this is all done on a project level. There is one more additional level of budgeting that we can do with projects, and that's on the assignment level. But it's very, very important for me to note that doing an assignment level budget will override this budget detail. Okay, now to do that, you actually have two ways. You can do that on a per assignment level, kind of as the work happens. So what I mean by that is if I come up here and I start working on my project and I assign work, I'm given my create assignment screen. And this is where I can choose the due dates, the next assignment in my workflow, the staff member who's going to do that task, and the estimated hours. This is very, very similar to what we saw earlier with the to-do. So I'm saying in this case, Philip has 1 hour to take care of the client interview. Fantastic. So I go ahead and say OK, and it shows up on Philip's list here on the bottom. Now you'll notice that our project budget actually reverted to 1 hour. And you'll remember we actually had 4 in there earlier. The reason it's doing that is we're no longer saying this project's going to take 4 hours. We're saying there's 1 hour of budget that's been assigned. And then at the end of the day, when this project is complete and all the steps have been budgeted and all the steps have been completed, we'll see our total budget for the project. Not to mention we'll see our actuals just below that. Now, that's one way to handle the assignment level budgets. In addition to that, you can also do that from the work list. And again, just like the to-dos and phone calls, we can actually see those numbers down here on the bottom. So if we go to our work list, we can see a lot of budget details from this screen. And if I expand this out a little bit, maybe we'll be able to see a little bit more. So we can see our task. We can see my name here, the assignment I've been given. And as we come over and we scroll a little bit, we can see what the original budget was. Remember, we entered in $1. Okay, maybe it was 1 hour, I apologize. The current budget, meaning maybe it's been updated at some point, so we can see where it's currently at, how much time I've tracked, what's remaining, and so on. So again, it's just important to know that if you're going to use this type of budget on a per assignment level, there is a lot more management involved, because not only will I potentially have to give a budget when I assign work, I may even come in here prior to that assignment being given out to enter those budget details. Okay, so in order to do that, you can actually, from the work list here, come up here to the plus button and actually add a budget. And what this allows you to do is not only select the assignment and staff member, but you can choose when it's actually going to be assigned to them, and you can enter in the budget details down here. So again, this can be a little complicated because there's a lot of moving parts. It does, on one hand, give you a lot of detail and allow you to be very, very specific about budgets per assignment, per staff member, and so on. Okay, but it does require a little extra management. So all of these systems allow you to track your budget details, again, whether it's an event like a phone call or a to-do, or a project budget. And all of those budgetary details, from assigned work to time tracked, will then populate your staff budget. And that can be both reported on and seen on screen.